Hey guys, in today's video, I'll be building a simple question and answer app in Flask. So this is what it looks like. So it allows you to register as a user. So I'll register, let's say Pretty Printed is my name. Now I'll register as a user. And then I'll log in with that same information. So Pretty Printed, log in. So now I can see the questions. Well, I saw this before, but basically these are the questions that have been answered already. So what I'll do is I'll ask a question and I'll say, what is this video about? And I'll ask it to expert number 3. So I'll hit submit. Then what I'll do is I'll log out and I'll log in as expert 3. And if I go to unanswered questions, I can see what is this video about. So this is the question that I just asked and I can give an answer. It's about building a Q&A app in Flask. Hit submit. No more questions. But if I go to the home page, then I can see I have this question. What is this video about? It's about building a Q&A app in Flask, asked by Pretty Printed, answered by expert 3. And I also have an admin user. That's just my name. And basically I can see all the users that exist in my system and I can promote them to be experts if I want by simply clicking on one and then they become an expert. So that's the app that we'll build in this video. It's going to take a little while, but after the video is over, you'll see how to build a realistic app. So you can get the code for this video in the link below if you don't want to type out all the code yourself. And I give you a challenge at the end of the app so you can add some extra functionality to make it just a little bit better. So before we get into writing the code, I just want to mention that I have the Flask cheat sheet available. This covers some common things that you would do in Flask. So if you want to download this cheat sheet, you can just go to prettyprinted.com/Flask cheat sheet, all one word, or you can click on the link in the description below. I'll have it as well. So now let's get into building this app. Okay, so to begin, let's go over the templates that we have. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 template files. So these obviously don't do anything yet, but these will be for our app. So we'll kind of bring these things to life. So you have one for asking a question, answering a question. Then we have the list of questions that have already been answered. We have a login screen. We have a question page. We have a register screen. We have a list of questions that needs to be answered. And finally, we have a user screen where we can just promote users to be a certain class. So that's all the files that we need to begin. So I have them in my project here and I'll move them to the appropriate folders in a second. But first I'll start by installing Flask. So pip env install Flask. And I'll just go ahead and create the folder while I wait. So I'll call this flask-QA as the name of the app. Inside of the app folder, I'll create another folder called templates, and that's where these template files are going to go. So I'll just put them in here. Just move them one by one. Okay, so I have all the templates in there. So I need to create another folder called static, and this is for my CSS files. So I have 3 CSS files. So I'll move them to static. And now they will be available to be used in my app. So I see I'm almost done installing, and I am done now. So let me start up the shell. And then what I will do is install a couple of other things. So I'll use flask-sqlalchemy. So pip env install flask-sqlalchemy. I'll be using flask-login, so I'll install that as well. So flask-login. And then I'll also install python.env so I can use the env files that I'll create in just a moment. So python.env, just like that. So in my main folder, I'll create the Flask environment file, and I'll create the regular environment file. In the Flask environment file, I can set the Flask environment. So flask_env equals development. So debug mode will be on. And then I'll set the Flask app to be flask-qna. So it knows to look inside of this folder to run the app. And then in the .env file, I know I'll have database configuration. So I'll say SQLalchemy database URI equals, SQLite, 3 slashes in the DB, SQLite 3 will be the name of my database. And if I need to add anything else here, well, actually I do. So I know I need a secret key. So I'll just put just some random characters as the secret key. So I need the secret key in the SQLalchemy database URI. And if I need anything else, then I can always come back here and update it. So now that everything is installed, I can go into my flask-qna folder. So this is the actual app folder, and I can begin creating the files for my app. So I'll start with the dunder init file. And in here, I'll bring in Flask. So from Flask, import Flask, and I'll create a create app function. So create app, and I'll set the config file to be settings.py by default. And then I'll instantiate the app object, and I'll add the config. So app.config.from py file, and then I'll pass in that config file. So by default, it's settings. And then finally, I return app. So let's go ahead and create. And where did that dunder init go? Okay, so it went in my static directory. It needs to go in the flask-qna directory, just like that. Okay, so on this level, I'm going to create the settings.py. And in the settings, I'll just bring in those values that I put in the .env file. So I'll import OS so I can get the environment variables. And then I'll set SQLalchemy database URI equal to os.environ.get, and then it's the same name in the environ file. So if you're not familiar with what's going on, is when I use flask run, it's automatically going to put everything in the .env file into the environment. So I'm just using the settings file to then get the things that are in the environment. So I'll do the same for the secret key. Secret key. And then finally, I'll set SQLalchemy track modifications equal to false, because I won't be using that, and it can be a little annoying when you have SQLalchemy running. So those are the 3 configuration values that I need for now. So the next file that I want to create is extensions file to bring in the extensions that I want to use. So I'll call this extensions.py. And the 2 extensions that I want to use are flask-sqlalchemy and flask-login. So from flask_login imports login manager, and then from flask_SQLalchemy imports SQLalchemy, just like that. And then I instantiate both of them. So I'll call this one login manager equals login manager, and then db equals SQLalchemy. And I'll import these in my dunder init. So once again, things aren't in the right location. So I'll move that over to my Flask app, and then I'll open the dunder init, and I'll import those 2 things. So from .extensions import login manager and db. I'll put db first. And then I'll instantiate those 2 things. So db init app, I'll pass in the app object here. And I need to do something similar for the login manager. So login manager.init app, I'll pass in the app. So now these 2 are registered on my app. For login manager, I'll need a couple of things, but I can't quite complete them until I get some other code working, but I can at least put the placeholders here and then comment them out. So I know for the login manager, I need a login view, and I don't know what it's going to be yet. So I'll just comment that out. And then I know I need a user loader. So at login manager.userloader, we'll use load user, and it takes in a user ID, and I'll return something. And I think my user table will be a user. So I'll just use user as the table, and I'll create that in a moment. So user query get, and then we'll pass in the user ID. So that won't work yet because I haven't created the table, but I'll do that next. So I have the 2 extensions set up. We'll create another file called models. And in this models file, I'll create the models that are necessary for this app. So basically we have users who can either ask questions or answer questions. And we also have an admin level user that can make someone an expert, someone able to answer a question. And then we have the actual questions and answers in the database. So we only need 2 tables for that. So first, from.extensions import db. So I can create the tables. So the first table that I want is a user table. So db.model. And it's going to have a few columns. It's going to have an ID column. So db column, db integer, and then primary key is true because it's the ID column. And then for a user, I want to have their name. So db column, db string, let's say 50 characters as the name. We need a password for the user. So password equals db column, and this can be a longer string. It's going to be hashed eventually. And then we need to know if they're an expert user or an admin user. So we'll just create Boolean columns for this. So we'll say expert equals db column, db Boolean, and then same for admin. So db column, db Boolean. So if this is true, they're an expert. If this is true, they're an admin user. If neither are true, then they're just a regular user. So the second table that I want to create is the questions table. So we'll call this question and then db model, and I need an ID column again. So db column, db integer, and then primary key is true for this particular one. And then I need the question text. So we'll call this question text. And we'll make this just a text field. And the same thing with the answer. So answer text. And you know, let's just make this question answer just to keep it a little shorter. So question and then answer. So db text. And then we need to know who asked the question and who is supposed to answer it. So I can say asked by ID. So this is going to be an integer column that is also a foreign key. So db foreign key. And the foreign key is going to be user.id. And it's also going to be the same for the expert ID. So db column, db integer, db foreign key, and then user.id. So they're both foreign key to the same column, but it depends on the user that is being talked about. So these two will always be different users. The asked by is going to be a regular user, while the expert is going to be an expert. So this doesn't need a comma. So that should be enough for our database. We can actually go ahead and add a relationship if we want. Let's do that quickly. So the first relationship will be for all the questions that the user has asked. So let's call this questions asked. And this is going to be db relationship. And then we're pointing to the question table. And because we have the same foreign key twice, flask-sqlalchemy won't be able to figure out which column we're working with, so we have to specify it directly. So we use the parameter called foreign keys, and then just pass in what the foreign key is. So it's similar to this. So question dot asked by ID. Then we have a back reference. The back reference for this can be asker. And then finally, the lazy needs to be true. So lazy and true. That's just how the data will be loaded from the database. So since this is a long line, let's make it a little shorter. Foreign keys, back reference, and then lazy equals true, just like that. Okay, so we have questions asked. So these are all the questions that the user has asked. And we need something similar for all the questions that have been requested to be answered by this user. So let's say answers requested. So this is going to be very similar to the one above. So we point to the question table. Foreign keys will be question and then expert ID. The back reference, we can say expert, and then the lazy will be true. So now we have everything set up in our database. So let's go ahead and create the tables in the actual database. So we can do this on the command line, but what I want to do is I want to use commands. So I'll show you how that works. So I'll create a file called commands, and in this commands file, I will import a few things and create a single command to create the tables in the database. So the first thing I need to do is import a library called click. So click is the library that Flask uses for the existing command line functionality. So if anytime I type flask and then like flask run or flask something else, this is using click. So I'm going to create my own click command. And then I need to import something called with app context. So from flask-sqlalchemy, import with app context. And this just makes it so any command that we run can use the configuration in the app. Because if you didn't have this, then it would just try to run the command standalone without activating your app first. And because it deals with the database, we have to know what the database configuration is. So we're going to use this with app context decorator. And then I'll import my DB object. So import DB, and then I'll import the models that I'm using. Import user and question. So we won't be using the models here, but there's a little weird thing that goes on when you go to create all the tables in a database. So I found that by importing the tables first or the models first, the tables get created. If you don't import the models, then they don't always get created. So now to create the command, to do that, the syntax is the decorator, so the @ symbol, followed by click, which we just imported, and then command. And then we need to give it a name. So I'll call this create tables. And then we're going to use that with app context decorator so we can have the database configuration available. And then we'll create a function. So this kind of looks like a route, but it's a command. So the name of the function will be create tables. And then inside of this function, I just put whatever code I want to be executed when I run the command. So in this case, I just want db create all. So now that I have that, I need to actually bring that in to the dunder init. So from .commands, we're going to import create tables, and then I'll simply add that command on my app. So down here at the bottom, we'll do app.cli, so command line interface, add command, and then I just need to add that create tables command that I just made. So now I can run flask create tables, and hopefully this works. And no errors. And we see on the left-hand side, the db.sqlite3 file was created. So let's go ahead and open that to make sure that it has our tables in it. So if I just type .tables here, I see question and user. So both tables were created successfully by only using that command. And if we were to add some more tables, then we just have to run this command again. So it takes a little bit of setup, but in subsequent uses, it's faster than going into the Python REPL directly. So now that we have that, we can start thinking about our routes. So let's create a file called routes. And our routes are going to be blueprints. So we're going to first import blueprints, and we know we have a bunch of template files that we want to show. So we're going to import render template, and we're going to use the database eventually in here. So we'll import DB, and then we know we're going to use the models in some way. So we'll import those as well. So import user and import, thinking of something else, thinking question. Okay, so have user in question. So I'll create a blueprint called main, and we'll say blueprint and then main, and then takes in dunder name. So it's similar to instantiating the Flask app. So once I have that, I can go ahead and start creating routes. So main routes / this will be the index, and I want to return render template, and then I should have an index. So this is where we're going to return all of our files. So I do have a home, so I'll return home.html. And then I'll do the same for the other ones that I have. So main routes. So let's go with ask. So we'll call this ask, and then return render template ask.html. And we'll just go through all of the templates that we have and create these functions. So we need one for answer. So we have home already. We can do one for login. We have one for question. We have one for register. So register.html. Then we have two more. So we have one for unanswered. So /unanswered. It gets hard to spell the same word over and over again. Like I'm having trouble spelling answer. So unanswered.html. And then finally we have users. So /users. And we'll call this users and return users.html. Okay, so we have all of the routes set up for now. Now what we want to do is we want to put this blueprint on the main app. So to do that, we go back to our dunder.init file. And I guess somewhere down here we can add it. So we'll have app.register blueprint, and we need to bring in the blueprint. So from .routes import main, and then I'll put it there and register blueprint. So I believe that is enough for us to see the routes working. So let's give it a try. And no errors. Okay, so these are all the templates, so I'll close them out because I can no longer view them because I moved all of the files. So now let me try going to my app. So it's 127.0.0.1 port 5000. And we see we have this route. So this is the home index, and then we have ask and answer and all of those. But we see the styles aren't working. So let's go ahead and add the styles. And let's take a look at a template file to see what it looks like. So we have home, and then we have the CSS here. So we have bootstrap and theme. And I believe all of them will be similar. Okay, so I have 2 CSS files. I don't know why I have 3. But we'll bring these in. Since all of these are the same, what I will do is I'll create a base template. So I'll copy this and I'll create a new file called base.html. And then I'll just remove the parts that are different per page. So we have the actual content. So the content goes in between the main div here. So we'll call this block content in block. And then let's see. That should be enough for now. We can also have the title, so block title. And of course, if we need to add any other blocks, then we can do that, but I think this is enough for now. So now let's go into each one of our files and use the base template. So at the top, we are going to reference extends. So extends and then base.html. So that should be enough to bring in the base template. And then we have a title. So the title for this one is question and answers. So block title is going to be questions and answers. And then we're going to end the block. And then we can find the content. So the content is everything inside of this main div here. So I'll just put block content and then in block at the bottom of it. In block. And then I can get rid of everything outside of the block because that's in the base template. So let's remove all of this. And we have the content block and the title block. So let's save this and see if it works for the home route. If it does, then we can continue the process with all the other templates. So we go home. It's not loading, and I think I know what the problem is. I didn't actually reference the static files. So let's go ahead and do that in the base template. So if we go to base.html, these are referencing files that are in the same directory as our base, but we have our static files somewhere else. So we use URL for static. So URL for, and then we put static, and file name will be the actual template name. So bootstrap.min.css. And then this should be double curly brackets instead of bracket %. And then we do the same thing for theme.css. So I can just copy this and put it here and just change this to theme.css. Okay, so now let's try. Let's try going home. Okay, so now we see it loads correctly. So the styles look fine for this particular one. So now we just need to do the same thing for all of the other templates, but the process will be easy because we already have the base template. So let's take each one by one. So we have answer, and let's open up home as well so we can see what's being done. So we can copy, basically we can copy the top 3 lines and put them at the top because they're going to be very similar. And then we just need to update the title. So answer question. And then we'll put the closing in block here. And then we'll just remove everything that's not necessary. So this is where it begins. And then this is where it ends. And then I can just bring this in block down. Okay, so that's the answer page. Next, we'll work on ask. So I'll copy this again. So ask a question. And then we can remove everything that is not going to be a part of the block. Then we can remove the in stuff and put in block at the bottom. Okay, so we have answer, ask, home. Let's do login. The name of the screen is login. And then for the content block, I'll remove all of this. And then at the in block. Next, we have question. So the name of this is just question. Remove everything. In block. So just 3 more to go. This one is register. And let's see, it begins here. So remove all of that. And then we can put the in block at the bottom. We have unanswered. The name of the title is unanswered questions. And then we can take out everything here. At the in block. Okay, and then the last one we have to do is users. Okay, so a little tedious, but we should be done, and we can check to see if there are any errors. So we have the ask routes, we have login, we have register, we have answer, we have question, we have users, and I may have missed one, but if we find that it doesn't display correctly, we can fix it when we get to working on that particular route. But at least we know we can get the styles working in our app, and we can see them here reflected when we actually go to use the app. So let's work on the registration first. So we have our routes, so log in and register. And these are a little different than the other routes because the other routes are like for the actual functionality for our app. So let's go ahead and take these two routes out and put them into their own files. So first I need to create a directory called routes, and then I'll create a dunder init inside of that. This file will be empty. And then next what I can do is I can move this routes.py in there. So routes.py into the routes directory, and I'll rename it. So I'll rename this to be main. So this will only contain things from the main blueprint. So I'll create a second file called auth, and this will be for our login and register. So let's go ahead and take these two out. So login and register. Then I need to import the same at the top. So from Flask import blueprints and render template. And then we'll create the blueprint. So blueprints, we'll call this auth, and then dunder name. And then we'll need to import the DB object in the models. So I'll just copy that, not cut, copy. And I actually don't need the question model here. I just need user. So I'm importing user, and I may not need user here, but I'm not quite sure yet. So I'll take away user there. So what's left is in the main blueprint, we have the routes for our app. So there are 7 or 6. Yeah, there are 6. And then for the auth, we have register and login. And then eventually we'll have log out as well. But for now, just log in and register. So now we can actually start working on this, but actually first we need to change the import path. So before I was just doing from routes import main. So now what I need to do is I need to specify exactly where they are. So from routes.main import main, and then from routes.auth import auth. So let's just make sure that still works. So this doesn't work because I didn't update the path in the routes when I import the extensions. So I can fix that. So here in auth, this needs to be the name of our app now since we put it in its own folder. So they're no longer on the same level. So we'll just say flask-sqlalchemy.models, and likewise for extensions. And then I'll put the same thing on the main blueprint. All right, so now let's give this another shot. Let's restart the app. And then we see inside of our auth, we forgot to change the name, or I forgot to change the name. So auth needs to be auth here and auth here. Okay, so users is working. And then login is not working, and register is not working. And the reason why is because I need to register the auth blueprint. So I'll go back to dunder init, and then underneath this one, register auth. So now we see register and we see login. Okay, so both of those are working correctly now. So we can go back to the code and actually start working on allowing the users to register first, and then we will allow that user to log in once they register. So the first thing we need to do is modify our model a little bit. So this supports flask-login. So up here at the top, I'll import from flask-login. So from flask_login, imports user mixin. So this will add some functionality to our user route. So our user model, I should say. So user mixin. So that allows us to use this with flask-login. And the second thing I want to do is I want to add the ability to automatically generate a hash password. So I'm going to create a property first. So the property is going to be a password, or let's just say pass. So property. And actually, no, we can say like unhashed password. So for property, we're just adding a property to the class. So we'll say unhashed password, and it takes in self. And this won't actually do anything because we won't be referencing it directly. So we'll just raise an attribute error because we have to have something here. So attribute error, cannot view unhashed password. So what we're really interested in is creating a setter. So for the unhashed password, we're going to create a setter. So anytime we initialize this value, anytime we set it, the code here will execute. So we'll create a function called, let's say hash password, takes in self, and then it takes in the actual value. So the unhashed password. And what we want to do is we want to set the password in our model. So password here, so self.password equal to the password that gets hashed. So we can import a function called generate password hash from workzerg. So Flask is built on workzerg. So we can say from workzerg, so werkzeug.security. We're going to import generate password hash. And there are other functions you can use for this, but this is already in the app, so we don't have to install anything else. So we're going to use this function here, and we're going to take in that unhashed password. So just a recap of what happens is when we create a user, we are going to start with the unhashed password and set it, and then this will automatically take that unhashed password and then generate a password hash and set it to password. And then when we save this to the database, our database will then have the hashed version instead of the version that the user typed in. So it's a little more secure. So now in our routes, let me close this out. In our route for register, we can start thinking about what we need to do. So I know this will take in get and post. So let's change methods. Methods equals get and post. Okay. So if request dot method equals post, this is when they're actually trying to register. So we need to import request up here. And we know we're going to have a name for the user. So if we go back here to our user model, we have a name and then we have a password. So really those are the only two things that we need. So we'll create variables. So name, and I'll just have like a placeholder here. And then we'll say unhashed password is going to be blank. And then we can go ahead and create that user. So we'll say user equals user, and then the name is going to be name, and then the unhashed password is unhashed password. So we're not passing in password directly. Instead, what we're doing is we're passing an unhashed password, and that will automatically get converted to the hash password and saved to the database once we use db session.add user and then db session commit. So that's basically the process for creating a user. Obviously, we need to get the data from the actual user, but this is the basic process. And once that's done, we want to redirect to the login screen so they can log in. So we need to import redirect and URL for. And if we go back down here, we can say return redirect URL for. And then we want to send them to the auth.login route, which is down here. We'll work on that a little later. So we have the data coming in from the user. So what we want to do is we want to go to the template, make sure we're sending that data when we submit the form, and then we'll process it. So let's open up the template for register. And then let's see if there's a form. So I see a form here. So we can just put the method. So method is post. And the action is going to be URL for auth register. So it generates the URL for us. And we have a couple of things. We have name and password. So for the inputs, we need a name. So name equals name. So you need the name key in your inputs so it can send the data correctly. The ID is for the HTML. So name equals password. So now if we go back to auth, we can bring those in. We can use requests, form, and let's use .get. Oh no, actually if they're not there, we want it to fail. So let's say request.form name and then request.form password. So this is still the unhashed password, but since we set this up already, it will go ahead and hash the password for us. So now we just need to make sure that submit button works. So button type submit. So it looks like everything is good there. So the last thing I can think about is the state of the user. So we have expert and admin. So I could have put defaults on here for false, but to make it a little more explicit so we can see what we're doing in this example, we'll put it here. So for the first user I'll set admin to be true and then expert to be false. And then I'll create a second user that's an expert. And then after that, it will be false for the subsequent users. So we don't have to go into the database directly to modify that. So admin equals true, expert equals false. Okay, so let's try creating a user. And if this works, we'll create the first user, which is the admin user. So we'll go to register. And we see we already have a problem. So line 33, invalid syntax. So this is in models. So let's see, line 33. We have a setter on unhashed password. And it might be because of this. I think the function name needs to be the same as the setter. So now let's try that. And that was the issue. So minor mistake. So now we have a user in the database. So if we go back to our database to look, so open up the database, SQLite 3, flask-sqlalchemy, and then db.sqlite, and then select star from user. We see I have a user in here. So we have my name, we have the hash password, not the actual password. We have 0 for expert and we have 1 for admin, and that's the order, right? So if we go back to our models, yeah, so expert is first and admin. So it looks like everything is working there. So now what we want to do is we want to write the code to handle logging in a user. So to do that, we'll go here. And once again, this is going to have two cases, one for get and one for post. So if request method is post, we are going to get the name of the user. So request form name, and then we're going to get the password. So request form and then password will be the input. Then what we'll do is we will search for that user. So we'll say user user query filter by. So we want to get the user with the name that was passed in. So name equals name. And we'll say first. And then we need to verify if the user has an account. So if we say if not user, meaning the user doesn't exist, then we want something to happen. And we can also do the check for the password here. So to do this, we're going to import a function called check password hash from workzerk. So what we can do is just take this up here and put it in auth. And it's going to be check password hash instead of get password hash. And then we'll say or not check password hash. We pass in the existing password, so user.password, and then we pass in the password that the user passed in. So what this does is it compares the password that was passed in by the user with the actual password in the database, and it will hash it and check the hashes for us, so we don't have to write any code to do that. So here, let's just create a variable called error message, and we'll just say could not log in, please check and try again. Okay, so we need an empty error message here. And then we'll say if there isn't an error message, so if not error message, what we'll do is we'll actually log in that user. So we need to import the function called login user from flask-login. So from flask_login, we're going to import login user. And then login user here, pass in the user. And then we can redirect the user somewhere. So we can say return redirect URL for, I want to return them to the main and then the index. I believe I named it index. Yeah, so just return them to the index if they log in successfully. If they don't log in successfully, then it will just display the login template again. So let's go ahead and start the app and we can see if I can log in. So first I'll try with invalid information and it just displays the login page. But now if I enter the actual information, I'll know that it works because it will redirect me to the home route. And it doesn't work. So something is up with our login. So let's see. So first we can try printing the user to debug this. And then we can check the password, but first let's check the user, because if the user doesn't exist, then we won't be able to log in. So let's log in with Anthony again, and then look at the console, and we see it's not printing anything. So print user, and let's try that again. Oh, actually, I know what the reason is. So inside of the template here, we need the names. So name equals name, and then this is name equals password. Okay, so let's try that again. So let's put in invalid information. We need to reload first and put in invalid information, so it redirects to the same place. And we see the password up here, so we need to set this to be method post. So for the form, method is post, and the action is going to be a URL for auth login. Okay. So let's reload this and hopefully it works this time. So we'll put in the correct information and hopefully it redirects us to the main page. And we see method not allowed, so we're getting closer, just missing a few things. So methods will take in both get and post. So now log in. And we see no user loader has been installed. So this is good because we know that the login stuff is working. At least the credentials are working. So if we go back to Dundernit, we can uncomment this stuff out. So now we know our login view is auth.login. And then the user loader is what I have here. So just return. And now let's go back to login. So user is not defined. So we need to import from models. So from.models import user. Okay, so let's try the correct information again. And finally, it redirects us to the home page. So we know my user was able to log in correctly. So a lot of things we have to deal with on that login route. But the good thing about fixing errors is you only have to do it once. So now let's work on the actual functionality of the app. So we see the links up here and we can go ahead and actually make these work. So let's go back to the template. So the base template, and we have these. I won't worry about the active class. So we have home, register, login, ask question. So we'll just create links for all of those. So URL for, And then the URL is going to be main.index for this one. And we can basically update the rest with the appropriate values. So I'll copy this and then I'll change the values to be what they actually are. So this one doesn't exist yet, so I'll just put this as index. But for login, it's actually auth.login. And then auth.register. This is ask, answer, then users. So now if we go back, the link should work. So we have login, register, ask, answer, users. Then log out doesn't do anything yet. We'll get to that later. So now let's look for a place where we can start working. So on the home page, we see a list of questions that have already been answered. So we don't have those yet. We just did the login and register pages. So we can actually start with the ask a question page, because with the ask a question page, we're creating something new. So we don't need anything existing. We just need experts in the database. So actually, let's go ahead and create a new expert. So we'll say expert 1, and I need to modify the route to reflect this. So I'll go to auth, and then we'll create a couple of experts. So true for that, and false for admin. And I'll also remove this print statement here because I don't need that anymore. So let's go ahead and create a couple of experts, expert 1 and expert 2. So register expert 1, and then we'll register again with expert 2. Okay, so now I have 2 experts in the database, and I also have an admin user. So before I forget, let's set both expert and admin to false. So any new users we create will be regular users. So to go back to that ask a question route, what we want to do is we want to have a list of all the experts in the database here. So we need to get the experts and we need to display them in this dropdown. So we can go to our main route and we're on the ask route. And the first thing we need to do is we need to look for the user. So we need to bring in the user model. So user query, and we're going to filter. We're going to filter by experts equals true. So we're going to get all the experts in the database, and we'll create a context here. So experts, and then experts, and then we'll pass that context to our template. And inside the template, this is the ask template. If we look here, this is what we are replacing. So I'll create a for loop. So for expert and experts in for. So I want to create an option for each one. So option, we'll have a value for the option, which will be the expert ID. So expert.id, which is their user ID. And then we'll have the actual name. So this is going to be expert.name. So now we should see the 2 experts plus the 5 placeholder ones when we refresh the screen. So expert 1, expert 2, and then we have the other ones. And if we inspect this, if I can inspect, we should see the ID in there. So yeah, 2 and 3. So users 2 and 3 are the experts. So we can remove the placeholders. And then we can set up the rest of the things for the form. So this is method post. Action is going to be URL for main ask. And then there should be a button, which is a submit. So that's okay. So the select needs to have a name. So I'll call this expert. And the question text needs to have a name. So we'll say question, just like that. So now let's make sure we can get this information in our route. So we'll set this to have both get and post methods. And we'll say if request method is post. What we want to do is we just want to print these. So we'll say question is request form question. And then the expert that is chosen is request.form expert. And let's just print these out. So print question and print expert. So let's go ahead and try to submit this form to see if we can view this. So request is not defined. I need to bring that into this file. So this is my question for expert 2. Submit. And now let's see if it appears on the console. It does. So this is my question for expert 2, and the number 3 appears. So number 3 is the third user in the database, but it's actually the second expert that was created. So we don't have to worry about that particular one. So now that we have the text and the expert, we can go ahead and create the question object. So we can say question equals question. And if we look at our model, so we go back to models.py and look at question, we have the question text. The answer is going to be null, so we don't have to put anything there. We have the ask by ID and the expert ID. So before I get the ask by, let me start with the expert. So let's see, main. So we have question equals question, and then expert equals expert because of the whole back reference thing. But actually, no, we would need to query for the expert first, so we can set the expert ID directly. And then the ask by ID will be the last thing that we need. So let's format this a little bit better. So the ask by ID is actually going to be the current user's ID. So from flask-login, so from flask-login, we're going to import a function called current user. It's actually not a function, it's like an object that has the current user information. And we'll also use login required. And we'll set this under the ask route because only logged in users can ask. And then we can take the ID of the current user and set it to ask by. And then we can add this question to the database and commit it. And then we can redirect the users somewhere. Once we do this, let's redirect them back home. So return, so I don't have redirect in URL 4, so redirect and URL 4. And we want to send them to the index once they ask a question. So this should be everything that's needed. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another user, a regular user, and then ask a question to see if it gets inserted into the database correctly. So let's go to register, and we'll create a regular user. So this user will be regular and register. Okay, so we'll log in with regular. And then we'll ask a question. This is a question for expert 2. What is your name? So I'll select expert 2, hit submit. It returns us the home page, so it seems everything worked correctly. So let's verify that. We can open up the database and then select start from question. And then we see the text of the question. We have nothing for the answer yet. We have the user who asked, so user number 4, I just created that. And the question is for expert number 2. So everything there is working correctly. So now that I can ask a question, I need to be able to view the questions that need to be answered by the expert. So the route that I'm interested in is the route called unanswered. So this is going to be something for the expert users. So let's just take a look at what it looks like here. So /unanswered. So we have questions for you. And basically what we want to do is we want to see the questions that are available. And then we simply want to click on that question to give an answer. So the answer one, it's going to be basically the question appears up here. We type in an answer, hit submit, and then on the home page, it will appear here. But we're going to work on the unanswered one now. So we're going to be using the expert user. So let's log in as expert2. And we'll go to unanswered. And we want all the questions for this particular expert to appear. So let's add a query for that. So we go to unanswered. And we're going to query the questions table. And basically we want all the questions that are both for that expert. So expert ID equals current user.id. So this one needs that login required. So expert ID equals current user.id. And then we also want to say the answer is null. So question.answer is equal to none. And then just give us all of those. So we'll say unanswered questions. And then we can put these on separate lines. So we have the unanswered questions and we want to pass that to the template. So we'll create a context. We'll say unanswered questions. And then we'll pass that context. So now we go to the template. So let me close out the templates we're not using at the moment. So unanswered. And here's what it looks like. So we're going to loop over the unanswered questions. So for question in unanswered questions, just like that. And then we'll close the loop. So this is the code that goes in between the loop, because this is what we want to generate for every question. So first, we have the href. We'll come back to that because that takes us to the answer page. But here, the heading, that's the actual text of the question. So we can say question.question. So question, the second question, is the actual question in the database. And we can do ask by. So question dot, and then we can look at the back reference we have on models. So we have the ask by, so asker is what it's called. So question.asker.name. So that will give us the name of the user who asked the question. So now let's go back here and take a look. And unknown tag question. So this should be a for loop. So for question in unanswered questions. Okay, so we see this is a question for expert 2. What is your name? And then we see the placeholders. So now that we know this works, we can get rid of the placeholders. And then we can set this to be the URL for the answer route. So URL for answer. And then it takes in a question ID, which I'll create in a moment. So question ID is going to be equal to question.id, just like that. And if I go back to main and go to answer, So this will take in a question ID, which is an integer. And I need to pass the question ID inside of answer here. So now let's see if that works. So main.answer doesn't work. So let's see, question ID there. And I see this should be main.answer instead of just answer. So let's give this a shot. And oh, this is actually the navigation. So the navigation should not have the answer question because we won't go to it directly. Or I actually deleted the wrong one. So main answer here. Okay, so we see this, we click on the link here and we see the answer page. So now let's work on the answer template. So we go to answer and we'll need the actual question text. So what is up there? So we need to query for the actual question text. So we'll say question equals question query get, and we'll pass in that question ID. And we can make this get or 404 just in case we accidentally go to a wrong question. And then we'll return that question to the template. So let's create a context with that question in it. And then pass the context here. Inside of answer, this will just be question.question. Okay, so now we need to handle the form. So this will be method posts, and the action will be URL for main answer. And this will be answer for the actual text. So now let's go back to main. We'll allow this to be for both get requests and post requests. So we'll say if request method equals post, what we'll do is we'll set the answer text equal to request form and then answer. And then we'll go ahead and save this. So db session commit, and then we'll redirect the user back to the unanswered page. So URL for main on answered, just like that. Okay, so let's try answering this question. And we see I forgot the closing quotes. And we see the main answer here. So this needs to have the ID. So question underscore ID equals question dot ID. So we're answering the question specifically. All right, so my name is expert2. So hit submit. And now we're back to the questions for you page, and we don't see anything because I don't have any unanswered questions. So remember, that's what that filter was in the block, where was it? In the query, I should say, for this question.answer equals none. So we're just checking to make sure the question hasn't been answered already. So now we can go to the home page and we can display all of the questions that have been asked and answered. So here, basically the query is going to be similar, except instead of searching for unanswered questions, we're going to search for questions with answers. So questions that have text in the field. So let's go to the home routes and we're going to query. So say questions equals question query, and then we're going to filter question dot answer is not equal to none. And we can probably say, yeah, I'll keep it consistent with the is not like that instead of the actual words. So we want all of these, and then we can just pass them to the home template. So context equals questions, and then we'll pass the context. Then we'll open up the home routes, and we'll create the loop. So for question and questions, we'll have the in for, and we can copy this and put it inside the loop to make it dynamic. And then the text here is going to be actual question text, so question.question. And then we'll have ask by is going to be question.asker.name. And then the answer by will be the expert. So question expert.name. So expert comes from the back reference here. So answers requested, and then expert just like that. And let's see if it appears. So here's the question, and then we have the 3 placeholders, so we can remove it. So now we just see the one question. Next, we want to be able to click on the question and go to the question page. So if I go to the main routes, what I'm talking about is question here. So this one is going to take in a question ID as well. So question_ID. It's going to be an integer. So question ID. And let's set up the link for that. So URL for question, and then the question ID equals question.id from here, and then close out the URL for. So let's see if that works. Could not build, so I believe this is in the base template again. So actually, no, it's not in the base template, so we messed up somewhere. Yeah, so this should be main.question instead of just question, because we're using blueprints. So now if I click on this, it takes me to the actual question page. So now we can just replace these values with the values from the database. So if I go to main, it needs to pass the question to the template first. So question equals question, query, get or 404, and then we want to pass in the question ID. And then we'll create that context. And we'll pass the context to the template. Then inside of the template for question, we can update all the values. So it's a pretty simple page. So question.question is the question, and then we have the answer. So question answer. Then we have asked by, so question asker name, and answered by question expert name. Okay, so if we look at it now, we see this is a question for expert 2. What is your name? My name is expert 2 is the answer. Asked by and answered by. So we can easily go between those 2 pages. So it looks like we have all the functionality working for the main part of the app, which is basically asking and answering questions. It's a Q&A app. So now let's look at the things that are left to be done. So close out that, I'll close out this. So let's look at the routes that we haven't worked on yet. So we have one for users. So this is for the admin users. Unanswered is working for now. Question is working. Answer is working. Ask is working. And the home route. So it looks like it's just users that needs to be done. So let's go to the users page. So users setup. And basically we have a list of users. So what we want to do is we want to query for all the users in the database. So user query all, and we'll call this users. And let's get all the users that aren't admin. So we'll do filter by admin is false. And then we'll pass that to the template. So this will be users. Pass the context. And then open up the template for users. And we'll go ahead and loop over this. So for user in users, we'll add the in4 here. We'll put the links inside. And we'll say user.name. So we'll leave the active part for now. And let's see. Okay, so we have expert 1, expert 2, and we have regular. And then the final 3 are placeholder values. So what we want to do is if they are an expert, we want this to be orange. And if they're a regular user, we want it to be this bluish color. So to do that, we have this active here. So if we take off active, then it doesn't display as orange. So we can say if user.expert. And if it's an expert, then we'll have active. So remember, expert is a Boolean. So if it's true, it displays active. If it's false, it displays nothing. So let's try this again. So we have regular is now a regular user. So let's get rid of the placeholders. Okay, so basically what we want to do as an admin user, we want to be able to click on a user to promote them. So like we have a regular user and we want to promote them. So what I'll do is I'll create a new user called expert3. So expert3, and the password will be just password. So I'll log in with expert3. So we have user setup. So we have regular and expert 3. So expert 3 isn't an expert yet. So as an admin user, I want to be able to click on this and basically promote them to an expert because everyone is going to start off as a regular user. So this is going to be pretty simple. We just need to create a new route. So main routes promotes. And this promote is actually going to take in a user ID. So int user ID, and then user ID here. And what we want to do is we want to first search for that user. So user equals user query get or 404 user ID. And then we just want to promote that user. So user dot expert equals true. And then we can save this. So db session commit. And then we can return them back to that user's page. So return redirect URL 4. And then this is going to be for main.users. Okay, so a pretty simple one. And then we need to update the links. So this is going to be URL 4 promotes user ID equals user.id. And then close that out. Okay, so promote isn't working. I always forget to put the main in front of it. Okay, so I want to promote expert 3. So when I click on this link, the page should refresh and then expert 3 should be highlighted. And that's exactly what just happened. So now I can promote users using the user setup screen. So let's just make sure there's nothing else that needs to be done before we start thinking about permissions a little bit more, because we don't want all the users to see all the links, and we don't want all the users to be able to do things like update a user. So let's put login requireds on all the routes that take a logged in user. So like promotes users. Unanswered already has one. Question is open for anyone. Answer is not open for anyone. So we'll just put login required there. Ask has one already, and then index doesn't. So for the permissions, what we can do is we can do something like, if they're not an admin user, then we can return them to the login screen or the index. So let's just do the index. So this will be the pattern. So if not current user dot admin, just return redirect URL for main.index. So let's save that. So we're logged in as the expert right now. So if I try this, it sends me to the index and it doesn't actually update it because I don't have the permission. So this is basically like the permission check. So I'll do something similar for the expert. So users, this is actually for admins only. So experts don't even get to see this. So I'll put it there. And then for unanswered, anybody, no, this is for the experts. So I'll put the check up here. So if not current user expert, then they get redirected to the index. This route is open. For answer, this is for the experts only. So current user expert. And then the ask routes, let's say only regular users can ask. So we really don't need any permissions on that because it's just regular users. And then we have the index. So all the permissions should be working now. So now let's work on the navigation bar. So we have the navigation bar, but for certain users, it should display certain things. So we have 4 types of users. So we have a user that's not logged in. Then we have a regular user, we have an expert, and we have an admin. So we want this bar to change depending on the type of user they are. So let's go to our base template and we should have access to the current user. So what I'll do is I'll just change home to the name of the current user if it works, because flask-login should inject the current user into the context for the template. So let's see, current user.name. So let's see if that works. So we see expert 3 here. So it looks like it's working. So before we do that, let's work on the logout route so we can make sure that logout is working correctly. So this is actually really simple. So it's going to be auth.logout, and I'll just create this really quick. So auth. So auth routes / logout. We'll call this logout again. And we're just going to call a function called logout user and then return to the login screen. So auth.login. So this should be redirect auth URL for auth login. And then we need to import log out user. Okay, so if we go to logout, it should work now, and it takes us to the login screen again. So what we can do is if we go to main, actually if we go to base, we can try that trick again with the current user. So let's see what happens when we don't have a current user. Nothing appears. So we know that the current user doesn't exist. So let's get rid of these brackets. And then what we can do is we can check if the current user is authenticated. So if current _ user.is _ authenticated. So that should be true or false. Oh, so this should be if not authenticated. And now we see the login and register links. So now for the logout is going to be the opposite. So current user.is authenticated. So the logout link will only show when the user is authenticated. So end if. So now the logout link should go away, and it does. So for the user setup, this is only for admin users. So if current user .admin, what we can do is authenticated and current user admin. End if. So user setup should disappear now. And then only logged in users can ask a question. So if they're authenticated, we'll allow them to ask. And let's see, anything else? Looks like that covers all of our links. Okay, so we're not logged in, so this is all we can do. We can just view the questions. If we log in as a user, so I'll log in as regular. I can log in. Now I can see the ask a question. So I can go ahead and ask a question. So how are you doing for expert 1? And then I see just that. So I can log out. I'll log in as expert 1 now. And now I should have a list of questions that are unanswered. So I'll go ahead and add that link. So let's put this next to this one. So we'll say if current user is authenticated and current user is an expert, we'll put a link for the unanswered questions. So unanswered, and we'll say unanswered questions. Might be a little long, but we'll see how it looks. Okay, so unanswered questions. We see questions for you. How are you doing? I'm fine. Hit submit. When we go back to the home page, we see that. If we log out and then log in as the admin user, so Anthony is the admin user, we see I can ask a question, which I probably wouldn't do as an admin, and I have the user set up, and I can go ahead and work on promoting users. So that's it for all the functionality of the app. So really there's one thing that I didn't do, and that is add error messages for the login and register screens. So I'm going to leave that as a challenge for you. So what I want you to do is if the user's credentials don't work, so for example, when you go to auth and you create the error message, I want you to take this error message, pass it to the template and display it so the user knows that they can log in. And as a bonus, you can do the same thing for register. So one thing you can do is you can check to see if the user already exists in the database. If it does, then instead of adding a user, you can return an error message. So that's the challenge for you. If you have any questions on the challenge, you can always leave a comment down below and I can give you some hints. But I think it would be a good exercise to make sure that you understand everything that's going on here. So the rest of the app is obviously working. You know, it took a while. There are a few mistakes, but that's what happens when you're building an app. So I hope this video helped you. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. Make sure you get the Flask cheat sheet I talked about. And I hope to talk to you in the next video.